Let's get one thing straight. Working 70 to 80-hour weeks is not what it takes to be successful, and those who are constantly posting about how they are most likely statistically lying. Now, before I get to my own insane 67-hour work week, let's go ahead and jump into some data to back that up. According to a 2011 study done by the Labor Review, they found that people overestimate their work hours by 10 to 25 hours. In fact, the more someone says they are working or think they are working, the more likely they are to be completely off by a really big margin. So here's what they found out. People who estimated their work hours around 75 hours a week were off by 25 hours and most likely only worked 50. Now, if they estimated 65 to 74, they were off by 20. And then this was what was really interesting. If they estimated 55 to 64, they were most likely to work 45 to 55 hours and be off by an average of 10. And I think it's quite ironic that the lowest group of estimators actually statistically wound up putting in the most hours. So someone that winds up saying that they are working an insane amount of hours actually is statistically probably working less than someone who might actually be underestimating the amount of hours that they're working. So I guess humble people really do work harder. Now, as we move forward, just keep in mind that 50 an hour average that you're seeing in the actual column. So here is what my time card looked like for all of 2020. Yes, I am this OCD and I track my time just like everyone else on our team. And adding up all of my hours, I worked 2,126 hours for the entire year. That's an average of 43.39 hours over the span of 49 work weeks. There was some travel time, of course I got sick, and then of course a little bit of vacation, which is why it's 49 weeks and not 52. Just being honest, I didn't work all 52 weeks out of that year. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. If we were looking at an actual breakdown by quarter, you can see that my averages hovered around 40 hours a week, with only Q2 dropping below that 40-hour mark. Now, looking at these numbers and seeing that pretty much on average, I'm barely working over 40 hours a week, I could get a lot of hate comments asking if I actually cared about the success of my business, but we'll leave those for another day. Hate comments aside, here's a breakdown of what my highest hour work week looked like. First, we had 17 hours for quarterly goals and project planning. Then we had 7.5 hours of project management, that's base camps, meetings, emails, internal running of the business, over 10 hours in accounting, 2 hours spent hiring some content writers. Of course, I was working with another team member. It takes way more than 2 hours to hire someone. Then for research and development, working on a tool to actually help with our project management and tracking. That was about 4 hours and 15 minutes, 3.5 hours on YouTube, then 11 hours putting together a course. And then at the bottom, which I'll get to in a moment, 10 hours on training. Now, this gives me 37.5 hours on admin or running the business type stuff, and only 19 hours of actual creative work. Now, I get it. I'm like most business owners and I don't have the budget or cash flow to hire a full-time accountant or hire a project manager to do and run all of those day-to-day activities. And what this results in is barely 20 hours of my really insanely long work week was spent actually bringing something new to the table in terms of content, creating a product, or working on our actual sales to bring in new customers. Because going back to our chart here, you can see over half the time was spent just keeping things running smoothly. And if you're like myself or other business owners, then you can totally relate to this, because this is something that a lot of us go through, where we have enough work where it takes up half our week to keep things running, but we don't necessarily have the cash flow or income to completely delegate that to someone else. So the last thing that I want to point out here on my time card is that 10 hours of training at the end. Now, depending on who you talk to, that should or should not be included on my time card. So comment below if you think training should be included when someone asks you how many hours a week you work. So should it be included, or should it just be written off as that's just part of being a professional in any profession, and that's not actual work or part of working on your business because you're technically working on yourself? Now, with these numbers in mind, something I've found that is the biggest factor in the number of hours you have has actually very little to do with the actual time spent and more to do with how the time is being spent. And just to clarify, I'm specifically talking about business owners and entrepreneurs here. We're not necessarily talking about a boss that's giving you a bunch of work, because that is a completely different set of rules and psyche. So just entrepreneurship and building your own business or working on your own side hustle here. And that is because what you work on has a huge impact on your week because of your energy levels. We aren't robots after all. Ask me to spend a day doing sales calls, I'll be begging for relief by noon. Ask me to build a spreadsheet, you'll have to pry my fingers away from the keyboard come 12 a.m. And there are two factors that we have to consider when it comes to managing our energy. First, preference. Do you enjoy that kind of work? And second, pressure. How big is the impact if you fail? And these are the two factors that seem to have the biggest impact on how many hours I can actually put in to a workday, and most likely how many hours you can wind up putting into your workday. Because the more you enjoy something, the less energy it's ultimately going to take, and you're not going to be borrowing from your future days or weeks' energy. And of course, the less pressure there is, the less stress you're putting on your body in terms of your physical health state, which means you can actually wind up going longer hours. Or put another way, should we really be impressed if half your workday is spent sitting in meetings, doing podcast interviews, or just live streaming compared to, say, a developer coding something completely new for 8 hours straight, or writing a sales letter for 3 hours, or having 5 back-to-back sales calls that will make or break your quarter? Because the more you dislike a task and the more painful the failure of that task is, ultimately the less productive work hours you're going to have in yourself per week. And this leads us to the mindset that we need to have as entrepreneurs. Now, outside of what science and history has to say about how many hours we should be working as entrepreneurs, adopting a marathon mindset is vital, since that's what this is. It's a marathon, not a series of short sprints. So here's the big question. What is the maximum amount of time and energy we can devote this week without borrowing from next week? And this is going to be different for everyone based upon their type of business, their type of work, and of course their personal health habits as well, and how much sleep they're getting, although we'll leave that for a different rant and video. The good news is, just like working out, you can actually train yourself to increase the number of hours a week you can actually put in. However, even with training, we still have some physical limits as human beings before we start borrowing from our future energy and vitality to get work done this week or today. Now, according to anthropologists, hunter-gatherers probably worked around 3 to 5 hours a day. And since we're on the subject of our ancestors, Charles Darwin, the father of the evolution theory, was known to only work 5 to 6 hours a day, and his work is still in college textbooks today. And fast forward to today, we have a CDC study that analyzed over 52 different studies that looked at work hours, overtime, and of course, health and the total productivity of people. And so here's what they found. 3 big takeaways. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out the full PDF. It is a very interesting read, although you're going to have to devote a few hours to it. There is a lot in there. But here's the bottom line. Number 1, total workweek hours play a significant role in the number of work hours you have per day. Productivity output significantly decreases after 8 hours of work, and many studies found that 10 hours of work produce the same output as 8. And finally, the kicker, a 50% increase in office hours will only result in a 25 to 30% increase in output. What this means practically is an extra hour in our typical 8-hour workday is the equivalent to only 15 extra minutes of productivity. So 1 hour at the end of your workday, let's say hour 9, 10, 11, 12, is the equivalent of 15 minutes in hour 1, 2, or 3 of your workday. I don't know about you, but that is pretty insane. And finally, to get to our magic number of ideal workweek hours, a 1993 study of violin players concluded that those who were at the top of their field practiced no more than 4 hours per day, which led researchers to conclude that we as humans have a maximum capacity for deep, meaningful, intense work of 4 hours per day. And a fun fact, this is the same research group that worked with Malcolm Gladwell to develop his 10,000 hour rule for his book, outliers. And so with these 3 pieces of information and all of these studies and time of effort from researchers, we can come up with an ideal workweek hour range based upon wanting to perform at a maximum level, and of course making sure that we aren't, as human beings, totally destroying our bodies in the process. Because after all, we all know that you can't go to the gym every day and work out 100%, right? So the same is true when it comes to our business. There is an upper limit. And so to summarize all the findings, we have 8 hours of peak productivity in us per day. 4 of those hours can be devoted to something that is really deep and intense and mentally taxing. Then the other 4 hours we can do administrative work or something that is a lot more fun for us or very, very low pressure. And then of course we can go upwards of 48 to 50 hours a week max, which means we're looking at 8 hours a day, 6 days a week for peak productivity and ensuring that we aren't borrowing from our future health. Now, this leads us to the question that we should be asking when it comes to how many work week hours we're going to put in. Because if we know as human beings, we have an absolute max of say 48 or 50, if you really, really wanted to push it. If I only had 4 hours per day, what is the one project task that I would work on? Sounds extreme, yes, but the key to being successful as an entrepreneur is to look at time as a constraint and not a variable. This constraint introduces a healthy level of pressure and forces us to focus to get things done without sacrificing future energy or progress. Because remember, work expands to fill the time. There's always more to do than time allows, and your most important task for long-term success is rarely urgent. So 67 hours or even 70 or 80 hours might make for a great Instagram post or YouTube video, but when it comes to actual productivity and being successful in growing your business, not so much. So thank you so much for watching. Sincerely hope you got some value out of this video, and most importantly, some encouragement and some grounded figures in terms of how many hours you actually have as a human entrepreneur business owner to put into your business to bring your vision to life. So hit that like button, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and until the next, keep building the business you love.